work when I loaf. Why not? That's what they pay me for.
They pay you for what?
So I'm loafing there.
I loaf there, would you?
I should say not. You
Join a union, loafers?
Lou Costello was the highest-paid comedian in the world, but his contract with fame came at a deadly price. We all know the Who's On First routine, but few know about the secret war waging behind the scenes. He made a living making us laugh, but Lou Costello lived a life of pure, unadulterated horror. Why did the man who gave everything to Hollywood end up losing his soul? Let's pull back the curtain on the comedy legend who died of a broken heart. To understand how a comedy king lost it all, we have to go back to where the fight first began. The Scrapper from Paterson. Long before he became the short, chubby, funny man everyone loved, Louis Francis Costello was a kid who practically grew up on the streets of Paterson, New Jersey. Born in 1906, he was raised by immigrant parents. Lou attended a public school and was only there for a short while. While his peers were in school, he had other plans for himself. Instead of pursuing a degree, he decided to focus his time and energy on the basketball court and in the boxing ring.
Lou Costello was born Louis Francis Costello on March 6, 1906, in Paterson, New Jersey. Lou went to school in Paterson and was a good athlete, playing basketball and boxing under the name of Lou King.
It might be unbelievable to imagine Lou was ever an athlete in his prime, but he was. During those years, he boxed under the name Lou King and fought 12 professional bouts as a featherweight, and out of the 12 fights, he won 11 of them. While he was winning fights and earning championship titles, Lou had his heart somewhere else. He secretly wanted to be an actor. There were days when he would visit theaters just to sit in the dark to watch silent comedies of Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. He knew he did not want to spend his life as an athlete. So in 1927, with a few dollars and a lot of nerve, he hitchhiked across the country to California. However, when he got to California in search of a career in acting, it wasn't as rosy as he thought. All he could find for work was a job as a carpenter at MGM. But he didn't stop chasing his dreams as an actor. It wasn't until one day, when he was noticed because of his athletic build, that he was eventually cast as a stuntman in the 1928 movie The Trail of 98. It wasn't what he had hoped for, but Lou soon realized he could take a punch or a tumble better than most men, and he got used to it. He also noticed that whenever he did his stunts, the crew on set would burst out laughing. Not only was he now a reliable stuntman, he was also a funny one. But as Lou began to find his footing in Hollywood, a chance encounter in a smoke-filled burlesque theater was about to change the history of comedy forever. Lou realized that being a stuntman wasn't going to take him anywhere in Hollywood, so he packed his bags and headed to a burlesque. During the 1930s, burlesque was the Ivy League of comedy, where you could find every type of creative possible. The stages were usually covered in smoke with tough crowds, as audiences were never afraid to express themselves. It was a tough world in burlesque, but that was the only place Lou knew he'd get to where he needed to get to. It was here that Lou crossed paths with Bud Abbott. Bud was everything Lou was not. He was tall and thin, and had a disciplined, serious way of speaking. He was a straight-man master at understanding jokes better than anyone in the industry. Legend says Lou and Bud only teamed up because Lou's regular partner and straight man could not make it to a show because of a brief illness. When they stood on stage together for the first time, the energy in the room was incredible, and the chemistry these men had was undeniable. Their act worked perfectly because of their roles. While Bud played the fast-talking bully who always had a scheme, Lou was the innocent, vulnerable child who ended up confused and frustrated. They spent years honing their craft in cheap theaters across the country. Sometimes they performed 5 or 6 shows a day for almost no money. By 1938, their hard work finally paid off in a big way. Bud and Costello were signed by the William Morris Talent Agency, and in no time they both landed roles on a popular radio show, The Kate Smith Hour. This was the right exposure they needed. Since the audience could not see Lou's funny faces or physical falls, the comedy relied entirely on their voices. Their delivery was so fast that the radio engineers actually worried the listeners would not be able to keep up. They talked over each other, with a rhythm that was unlike anything else on the air at the time. In no time, they went from being two guys from the theater circuit to household names. Their routines became the talk of the country, and Hollywood came calling for them. This time, the studios were not looking for a carpenter or a stuntman. They wanted the biggest comedy duo in the world. They had overnight fame, but it was only the beginning. The birth of a legend. Universal Pictures saw their massive potential and signed the duo in 1940, and this move changed everything for the studio. Lou and Bud's first major movie together was called Buck Privates. It was a hit that grossed more than almost any other film in Hollywood at the time. The duo were no longer theater acts, but a part of the leading box office stars on the planet. Before they were signed to Universal, the studio was on the verge of bankruptcy. These two comedians single-handedly kept the studio from going under and kept hundreds of people employed. The secret to their success was a routine called Who's On First. Critics to this day still call it the greatest comedy sketch of the entire 20th century. This sketch was a masterpiece of wordplay centered around baseball players with strange names. What made it quite complicated was the timing, which had to be perfect because if either of them missed a single beat, the entire routine would fall apart. They had to practice a lot to get it right, and that perfection of their skills alone made them legends and sealed their place in history. Lou was a natural when it came to physical comedy, and it was a character that the audiences loved. His newfound fame brought him an incredible amount of wealth in a short time, and he was able to buy an estate in Van Nuys. He was finally living the life of his dreams. Even with all that money, Lou didn't allow fame or money to get into his head. He was still the same guy he had always been, and as some people would say, he never stopped caring about those around him. Even on set, he was known for always giving a helping hand to crew members who were struggling with bills. Years passed, and Lou went from being not only a famous star, but also about to take the next big step of his life. On January 30th, 1934, he married Ann Battler, the love of his life. They successfully built a beautiful family and were living the classic American dream. Lou seemed to have everything a person could ever want. He had the fame, the money, and the love of a devoted wife. The public saw a man who was always laughing and making others do the same. He was the king of comedy, and the whole world was his stage. However, the high-profile lifestyle was starting to take a heavy toll on his physical health. The illnesses he once had while he was younger were waiting in the shadows to strike him down again. Lou was on top of the world, but a sudden health crisis forced him into a bedridden nightmare that lasted for months. Lou was diagnosed with rheumatic fever, and it left him bedridden for months. This gave him enough time to reflect on his life and career. He realized that he was the main reason people bought tickets to see him and Bud. He also was the one taking the physical hits and doing the stunts. It was there, and then that he decided it was time for the money to match his efforts. He demanded a 60-40 split of the profits in his favor. For a long time, he and Bud had split the pay equally. When Lou won this negotiation, Bud Abbott wasn't exactly happy about it. This decision would further leave a scar on their friendship for the rest of their lives. Universal Studios watched the drama between the duo unfold, and they were worried that it would take a hit on them because they were their most valuable asset. They knew if the duo were to split up, the studio would lose its biggest moneymakers. To avoid that, the executives at the studio did everything they could to keep the peace. But they just weren't able to resolve the issue. The two men who appeared to be best friends on screen suddenly grew distant. They stopped speaking directly to each other and started using their agents as messengers. It was a strange way to keep the show going, but that was the only way they had to keep the show going, because the money was too good for them to leave. Lou further wanted to use his influence beyond what it was. This time he wanted more say in the production process, and this led to films such as The Time of Their Lives, which was different from the comedic characters they were used to. Despite the tension, Lou and Bud remained total professionals when the cameras started rolling. They were experts at hiding their resentment from the millions of fans who adored them. But outside the movie set, they seemed like two Hollywood stars at the top of their game. No one else had any way of knowing about the resentment growing behind the scenes. This rift was serious, yet it was nothing compared to the tragedy that was about to hit Lou's home life. He was finally feeling better and was ready to get back to his fans. Not until an unexpected phone call changed his life forever. The darkest day. November 1943 was meant to be a turning point for the Costello family. Lou was finally back on his feet after a grueling 6-month battle with rheumatic fever. Now he was finally ready to return to the spotlight. Even better, his youngest child and only son, Lou Jr., whom the family nicknamed Butch, was only 2 days away from his very first birthday. Everything seemed to be looking up for the famous comedian. While Lou was at the NBC studios rehearsing for his big comeback radio show, a tragedy was unfolding back at his home. Butch was playing in his playpen while his nanny had not been supervising. Somehow, the toddler managed to get out of the pen and crawled his way toward the backyard swimming pool. When Anne finally discovered her son wasn't in his pen, she looked for him and found a sight that no parent should ever have to see. Butch's lifeless body was floating in the water. Even though the pool was only 18 inches deep, it was enough to end the life of the small child. Anne was absolutely inconsolable as she called for emergency help. When Lou got the news at the studio, he rushed home in a total panic. He arrived just as the firefighters were packing up their equipment. They had tried all they could to revive the boy, but it was already too late. Butch was gone. What made this horror even worse was the fact that Lou had earlier told Anne to keep the baby awake a little longer than usual because he wanted his son to hear his father's voice on the radio for the very first time.
After arriving at the NBC studios, Lou received word that his baby son, Lou Jr., had accidentally drowned in the family pool. Lou had asked his wife to keep Lou Jr. up that night so that the boy could hear his father on the radio for the first time.
It was that one request that led to the end of his son. The weight of that decision became a shadow that followed Lou. He blamed himself for the death of his son, and this crushing guilt fueled a deep resentment that affected his personal life. With his son's life already gone, the world expected Lou to cancel his show, but Lou Costello was a professional to the core in the most painful sense of the word. Everyone around Lou Costello begged him to go home. His managers and friends could not believe he even considered working while his dead infant son was still in the house. He looked at his manager and said that he wanted to do the show because he wanted Butch to hear him wherever he was. He left his grieving wife and headed to the NBC studios, while the world remained completely unaware of his loss. The audience members sitting in those studio seats had no idea that the man they were about to cheer for was living through a parent's worst nightmare. Bud Abbott was usually the tough, disciplined partner, yet that night he showed a level of compassion that surprised everyone on set. He introduced the show with a heavy heart, knowing exactly what Lou was going through. When the on-air light turned red, Lou transformed instantly, jumping right into his routines with the same high energy. Some people in the front rows noticed that his eyes were bloodshot and red. His voice would crack occasionally, but he never missed a single cue or fumbled a joke. It was arguably the most difficult performance in the history of show business. The broadcast continued for the full hour, without the public knowing the truth. When the final segment ended, the mood in the room changed. Bud Abbott stepped up to the microphone and spoke directly to the listeners across America. He informed the nation that Lou had lost his only son earlier that afternoon. Seconds later, the sounds of people sobbing could be heard from the audience. The reality of what Lou had just accomplished hit everyone at once. As soon as the microphones were turned off, Lou finally let go of his professional mask and collapsed into a chair off stage. That night became a legendary moment in Hollywood history. It was the prime example of the professional rule that the show must go on. This one event became the start of the end of his happy years. Even though he excelled in his career and was still famous and wealthy, something inside him was broken. The grief started a long, slow decline for a man who once seemed to have everything. The laughter returned to the airwaves, but the man behind the microphone was no longer the same, and marriage was the first thing to take the hit. The aftermath of grief. The Costello house changed forever after Butch passed away, and things were not the way they used to be. Lou couldn't look at his wife, Anne, because according to accounts and reports from that time, it seemed that not only did he feel guilty, he also blamed her for the accident. This created a wall of silence between them that lasted for years. In those years, Lou had developed a gambling habit to escape from his family issues and all the emotions that came with it. He began betting massive amounts of money, often losing thousands of dollars in a single night. Along with the gambling, he tried to make something positive out of his grief. He spent millions of dollars to build the Lou Costello Junior Youth Foundation. This was a massive center for underprivileged kids in East Los Angeles. He wanted to make sure other kids had the chances his son never got to have. However, the man the public saw was not the man his family knew. His three daughters, Carol, Patty, and Chris, later shared that their father was very generous but emotionally distant. He would buy them anything they wanted, yet he could not give them the emotional connection they needed. He was like a ghost in his own home. He often spent more time at the foundation or the racetrack than he did with his own children. Not only that, but his health was also failing him. The rheumatic fever from years earlier had left his heart permanently weak. The physical stress and the emotional weight of his loss made things worse. Soon, he became a ghost of himself, not only to his family, but also to everyone around him. On movie sets, the kind, easygoing Lou was now someone no one could recognize. He developed a short temper and would make almost impossible demands that left his crew on edge. His grief was manifested as anger, and people started to walk on eggshells around him. As Lou struggled with his inner demons, his professional partnership with Bud Abbott was about to hit a breaking point over a most unlikely person, a housemaid. Lou had fired a domestic maid from his house because he believed she was being dishonest. Most people would have simply moved on to the next hire, yet Bud Abbott did something Lou found unforgivable. He immediately hired that same woman to work at his own home. To Lou, this was not a simple hiring decision, but a betrayal of their 20-year friendship. He felt his partner was siding with an outsider against him. This alone was the moment the brotherhood died. From that day forward, the two men stopped talking entirely. This time was a lot different from the time they fell out because of the wage split. This was a lot more serious. They lived and worked together for years without exchanging a single word. The most famous comedy team in the world were now complete strangers. At this point, Universal Studios executives were starting to get tired of the constant drama. It was almost impossible to make a comedy when the lead stars couldn't stand being in the same room. At the same time, the audience was beginning to lose interest in their films. Their box office numbers started a slow and painful decline in viewership. They tried to find a new spark by moving into television with The Abbott and Costello Show. Even with the program being a huge hit and a classic, it still couldn't fix the broken relationship behind the scenes. The two greatest comedians in the world genuinely disliked each other, but were only stuck together because of their fame and their finances. They were two men trapped in a business deal that had turned sour. They spent their days making the world laugh, while they suffered through a cold and silent partnership. Every handshake on camera was fake. Every smile for the public was a performance. While they fought over maids and percentages, a much more dangerous enemy was building a case against them, watching their every move and preparing to strike. The IRS nightmare. In the mid-1990s, the tax authorities finally caught up with the world's most famous comedians. The Internal Revenue Service hit both Bud and Lou with massive bills that summed up to hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid taxes. This financial disaster was a direct result of years of poor money management. Lou had made a fortune, yet his reckless gambling habits and expensive lifestyle meant the cash was going out as fast as it was coming in.
Lou would sit there, he'd have a towel around him, he'd be sweating so much. And there was a little Greek guy that played him and made a living off of him. They were not the greatest gamblers in the world.
He spent a lot and did not have the right people managing his accounts. The government was relentless and soon started seizing Lou's assets and placing claims on his property to ensure they got every penny. The financial fall was very sudden and brutal. Lou was forced to sell his estate in Van Nuys. He also had to give up his luxury cars and even his ownership stakes in every movie he had been in. For a man who had reached the highest levels of Hollywood fame, the humiliation of losing everything was almost impossible to bear. He was no longer the king of comedy. He was a man trying to survive a bankruptcy that was playing out in front of the entire nation. He had to stand by and watch as the government auctioned off his belongings to pay for his past mistakes. Bud Abbott's situation was even more tragic. While Lou had some resources left, Bud was eventually pushed into near poverty. He ended up living on a small pension, which was a far cry from the days when they were the highest-paid entertainers in the world. This financial disaster added an enormous amount of pressure to Lou's already weak heart. Doctors had warned him to slow down and rest, but there was no way he could afford to stop working. He had to keep performing to keep the bill collectors away. Lou began appearing in low-quality movies and variety shows that were far below his usual standards. He was working harder than he ever had during his peak years, yet he was doing it for a fraction of the pay. The joy of performing was replaced by the sheer necessity of earning a paycheck to stay afloat. The stress of the tax battles and the constant work took a visible toll on him. He looked tired, and his health continued to slide as the years went on. The partnership that had survived theater tours and movie sets could not survive the weight of these mounting debts. By 1957, with no money left and no love for the partnership, the inevitable finally happened. Abbott and Costello were no more. The duo officially split ways in July 1957, bringing an end to one of the most successful runs in the history of entertainment. After decades of sharing the spotlight, Bud and Lou walked away from the partnership that had made them household names. Lou was ready for a change. He wanted to prove to the industry and himself that he could be a serious, dramatic actor. He felt he had more to offer than just high-pitched screams and funny faces. He took a guest role on the popular television series Wagon Train. While Lou was trying to reinvent himself, Bud Abbott found it much harder to move forward. Without Lou by his side, Bud struggled to find his place in the industry. The man who was once the greatest straight man in the business eventually retired from the limelight, leaving the stage to his former partner. The split seemed friendly enough on the surface, yet the bitterness from their years of silence still lingered. Lou moved ahead with a solo film, The 30-Foot Bride of Candy Rock. It was a science fiction comedy that unfortunately felt like a far cry from the glory days when they were filming hits like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Lou was starting to realize that he was a man out of time. Hollywood was moving on to newer and younger stars, and the fast-paced comedy that had once ruled the world was beginning to fade. His physical appearance during this time told the real story of his journey. At only 52 years old, Lou looked much older than his actual age. The years of professional boxing, the grueling schedule of 5 shows a day, the loss of his son, and the constant tax battles had all left their mark. He was a man who had given everything to his audience, and the cost was written in the lines on his face. He was still trying to plan his next move and build a new career as a solo star. But his heart, damaged by disease and grief, had other plans. One last laugh. In early 1959, Lou found himself at Doctor's Hospital in Beverly Hills. He was recovering from what everyone thought was a minor heart issue. By March 3rd, it truly looked like he was getting better. He spent the afternoon in high spirits, cracking jokes with the nurses and greeting his visitors with the same charm he had shown for years. He even asked for a strawberry ice cream soda. After taking a long sip, he smiled and told those in the room that it was the best he'd ever tasted, but that soon became the last thing he ever had. A nurse had come in to check in with him routinely when Lou suffered a massive heart attack. In a matter of seconds, he was gone at only 52 years old. The tragedy of the news struck, and everyone was downright devastated.
I never saw my father cry in all the years I had been with him as his daughter. And that day, he did break down and cry. And he said, I just lost one of his best friends.
Bud Abbott was absolutely destroyed by the loss. When the press called him for a statement, he was heard sobbing on the phone, unable to say more than a few words before hanging up. Despite their years of cold silence, the bond between them was still there. Thousands of fans lined the streets for Lou's funeral. They stood in silence to honor the man who had made them laugh for years. While the world mourned a celebrity, one person felt a much deeper void. Lou was gone, but the tragedy of the Costello family wasn't over yet. His wife, Anne, was not about to let the love of her life leave her alone. Anne Costello had spent years living under a cloud of sorrow. She never truly got over the day their son, Butch, drowned in 1943. Through the gambling and the arguments, Lou had always been her anchor. Even when things were rocky, he was the person who held their world together. Once he was gone, Anne's health began to fail at an alarming rate. She completely withdrew from the world and spent her time alone. On December 5, 1959, only 9 months after Lou died, Anne passed away at the age of 47. Everyone who knew the family believed she simply died of a broken heart, as she could not imagine a life without her husband. Their daughters, Carol, Patty, and Chris, faced the impossible task of losing both parents in a single year. The tragedy seemed to follow the bloodline even further when Carol died of a stroke at 48. Just around the same age, her mother died. This string of losses made people whisper about a Costello curse, yet the family legacy stayed strong. The youth foundation Lou built was eventually taken over by the city. Regardless, Louis Costello's legacy is one that remains untouched till today. In his hometown of Paterson, statues stand today to honor the boy who went from boxing rings to movie screens. Even though his life ended in a way he wouldn't have imagined, he lived a very fulfilling life, to say the least. He was a complex human being who worked through grief to make sure the rest of us could smile. What part about Lou Costello's story stuck out to you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.